Hello, everyone. My name's Daniel Taillant. I'm with the Center for Human Rights and Environment, and here we are at COP26 in the final stretch, and we're at the Methane Pavilion, and it's become the methane moment. The world has figured out that not only do we have a very short time to fix our climate problem, but that methane is a big pollutant in this equation. It's about half of our warming since industrialization began, and more importantly, getting rid of it gets us to where we need to be a lot faster. And we're here today with two very important leaders from California. California always sets the stage for climate policy, and it's no different with methane and other short-lived pollutants. We have the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Agriculture, Karen Ross, and Liane Randolph, the head of California's Air Resources Board. Two of the most important organizations, I wouldn't say just in the United States, because California is the only jurisdiction to date that has a law to address these short-lived pollutants like methane that really affect climate so much. So I'd like to welcome our two speakers today. I hope we have a great discussion about methane, and I'm going to start right away with a few words and terms that most people haven't heard of. And you guys, you need to make them up. Atmospheric rivers, cyclone bombs, heat domes. I mean, we need new terminology to describe the impacts of climate change. And this is happening not only in California, it's happening around the world. We're seeing these changes drastically affect our environment, our ecosystems, our oceans, our air, our rivers. So I'd like to talk to you guys today a little bit about what California's doing, how you're addressing this. Why has California read the tea leaves so early? I mean, you have this short-lived climate pollutant law now for a number of years, and we're hoping that we can learn from you on how to deal with our climate emergency. I'd like to start with Secretary Ross. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Well, I just do whatever Liane tells me to, because the California Air Resources Board is a model for the world. Lots of smart people, lots of modeling, and they really spend the time that's necessary on stakeholder engagement to really make sure they're getting the policy signal right to the marketplace. And that's, I think, an important part of our equation. Agriculture was brought into this discussion specifically on methane in 2013 when the legislature was negotiating with the administration on SB 1383,
yes,
which was Short-Lived Climate Pollutant Act. And it really addressed three sources. It was landfill, it was oil and gas, and it was livestock emissions. That was a difficult conversation and a difficult process with the dairy producers and the livestock sector, but they walked down this path with us because we allowed time for voluntary incentive-based programs to work, but they also know that the law requires the Air Board to write regulations to back this up, and you'll be doing that process over the next couple of years. Is that right, Madam Chair?
Right.
Yes. So CARB is working hard on implementing SB 1383. So the first step we took was to adopt a short-lived climate pollutant strategy to reach the target it set forth in the law. And so that required us to take a look at landfills, as Secretary Ross mentioned, and establish requirements for landfills to capture their methane. It required us to adopt rules around oil and gas production and ensure that oil and gas facilities adopt rules to capture the methane that they were emitting, and so we adopted those rules. And in my former role at the California Public Utilities Commission, we adopted a complementary set of rules because the CPUC directly regulates gas utilities. And so we worked with CARB in my old role, and we adopted a complementary set so it can be enforced against oil producers and also enforced against the gas utilities. So it's a really important regulatory tool. And as Secretary Ross mentioned, if we do not meet the goals we need to meet, CARB will have to step in and implement regulations directly in the agricultural sector to address methane emissions as well.
Fantastic. And I want to get a little bit more into that in a moment, but you said something that's very important. You've been doing this for a long time. SB 1383 has been around, and we're having the methane pledge now, and countries are saying we want to do methane, but they're not sure how to begin. And you guys started with a law, 1383, and if you don't know it, I encourage you to look it up. It's the only jurisdiction in the world that has a law to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, so kudos to California. And you also have a plan. You mentioned the strategy.
Right.
And this is very important because this is what the negotiators are now demanding. So we have the methane pledge, and I should say, a month ago we had maybe 10 countries signed up to the methane pledge. We have 108 now.
Wow.
108 countries, and they keep growing. But the next question is, okay, no, this is not just blah, blah, blah about methane. How do we move? And I think California there has a lot to show us. You have experience on how to get a law in place, how to do a plan to actually implement the law. And I understand that now you are reviewing your plan. You're looking at results. And your governor said something recently to all of you guys. He said, I need more. Yeah, you're doing great, but we need more. We need to do it faster, and we need to do it better. And I think this is a challenging thing for many countries because it's not enough just to have a plan and to address these short-lived pollutants. You really have to lift the bar now, and we need to do that. What are some of the things that California is doing today to do that little extra mile that you might share with our community?
Well, can I give an example on data? So tackling the methane issue, you need to understand what your sources are and where they're coming from and who are the worst actors. You know, taking a look at your landscape and seeing who are the worst actors. So one of the things that California has done is partnered with NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the private sector to develop a methane satellite that will give us data that we need to identify sources of methane and provide that information so that then the regulatory agencies can take action, both to develop new strategies, but also to enforce the strategies we already have. And so that's a really important piece of data.
One of the things that we are seeing are these methane satellites coming on board. The California satellite, the Europeans have one. EDF, it's an environmental group, they're coming out with one soon. And this data will show us where the leaks are. Now, you've been doing this already. You have the planes that fly over California to look at your methane sources. And I'll emphasize something you just said, which is a few sources are the biggest part of the problem. So if you find the 5 or 10% of your biggest emitters, that's 80 to 90% of your emissions. And so is it difficult when you find those emitters and you have to hold them accountable?
Well, you know, we have built a regulatory structure that allows us to do this, and also we have built strategies and markets to get rid of the gas that is collected from the regulatory steps, right? So the landfills have to capture this methane, and then what we try to do is make sure that we provide the funding and the information they need to convert that methane to renewable gas and to use it for their own use or to find a market for that renewable gas. And that's an important strategy.
I'd like to go to Secretary Ross now because you're on agriculture. You have challenges too. And the biggest pushback we're getting in the methane pledge is from the ag sector. They're saying this is against us. They're demonizing us. We're hearing this from the ag sector. But that's not the full story. Can you tell us how that plays out in California?
Well, I mean, certainly it was frightening, and people felt that they were at risk, that this was really about trying to put dairies in particular. Our dairy model is very intensified, which is part of the efficiency, and we have the smallest environmental footprint for gallon of milk produced. But we have large number of cows in very condensed areas. And so people were concerned this was really just a way to put them out of business. But because there was a strategy, there was time, we allow for voluntary practices to help us meet this. And because of our cap and trade process, there is investment that is made for incentive grants to show to the marketplace and to show to private financing that this is a place for us to go. So what the chair talked about, the ability of PUC to do complementary biogas acquisition was a huge piece of this. Electricity has always been a piece of making dairy digesters become a revenue generator. But what the magic here is the low carbon fuel standard is where we were seeing most of the changes really happening. But what that allowed the farmers in dairy in California to do it helped them see this is a very powerful, short-lived climate pollutant. It's also very powerful if we can rededicate it to replacing fossil fuels, to clean, renewable energy. And we have seen the sophistication of the dairy digester technology move us further and further along that pathway. So the dairy families have embraced this, and it's not only on dairy digester technology. For smaller dairies, they wanted to be a part of this as well, and so we have alternative manure management practices. Right. We have 117 programs in dairy digesters, 116 in alternative manure management practices, because it's nutrient rich. There are ways to send this to compost, to bedding. There are ways to rededicate this. And the one area that's going to be most challenging for us is enteric fermentation. We just don't have the magic solutions out there yet because it's complicated. Health of the cow, quality of the product, but we were over 50% of the way on just what we've been able to do on the dairy digesters and alternative.
Is this about lowering productivity of farmers by making them produce less, or is it more about increasing their productivity so they emit less?
That's a great question, because the concern of the environmental justice community is that this is a stealth way of allowing more and more cows to be there. There's a number of environmental challenges facing the dairy sector, including groundwater and the nitrate issues. There has always been the air pollution issues, and our numbers show that this is not increasing cow numbers, but it's a concern of neighbors and communities in the environmental justice community.
So we've mentioned short-lived pollutants or short-lived climate pollutants several times. I just want our audience to know what we're talking about, because that's not always clear. So we're talking about methane, which is one of the reasons we're here today. We're talking about HFCs, which are refrigerants, and refrigerants can be very dirty. I think, Chair Randolph, you know about that from your time at CPUC. We're talking about ozone, which is derived from the mix of gases, and we see that a lot in dairy and agricultural areas. And I'm forgetting one, black carbon. So these are 4 pollutants that are critical to achieve 1.5C. And another thing that I see in California, and I sit into your staff meetings sometimes online, which is great that you offer them through the Strategic Growth Council, where everyone comes together and talks about these policies. But what I have found in many governments is that you're not having conversation between the energy people and the air quality people and the ag people. And so California has this all of government approach. And I'd love for you guys to reflect a little bit on how that helps you and doesn't create barriers when one ministry or one secretariat is trying to do one thing and maybe is not talking to someone else.
Well, I think, Karen and I are a great example of how important it is to work together and to have a lot of conversations about these strategies and what is effective and what concerns she's hearing, what concerns I'm hearing, and what tweaks we need to make to our regulatory programs and the programs that Karen runs so that we're addressing the concerns that we're hearing across constituencies. And we have all of the secretaries and agencies in California. We get together regularly as the climate cabinet and advise Governor Newsom on what we need to do and what our strategies need to be. And short-lived climate pollutants are always a part of that conversation. Yeah,
you know how easy it is to get siloed. We do it in every sector of the economy and society, whatever it is. We also know in some cases, that's what the stakeholders are counting on, is that they can come talk to one of us and create some spin around that. And to have all the perspectives at the table from all the different viewpoints that we have is always going to lead to much better and longer lasting, more successful results.
Secretary Ross, a moment ago you mentioned environmental justice, and we haven't talked about that yet, but California is big on EJ.
Yes.
And that has now evolved into a discussion about climate justice and climate equity and how climate change doesn't affect people in the same way. There are some communities, disadvantaged communities, that suffer more from heat because maybe there are no trees planted in their neighborhood. And when it's 100 degrees outside, it's 120 in those communities. Or they might be next to an oil and gas site where they're not breathing the best air. How does California address this question of environmental equity? And not only how are we dealing with environmental justice, but in our rush to save the climate, can we do both things at the same time?
So, yes, I believe we can do both things at the same time. And I'll give you some examples. I mean, we are really rethinking all of our programs with equity in mind. And so some examples are when we adopted our new research plan, we do a triennial research plan at CARB. And we took a moment, we stopped before we adopted our new plan and said, wait, let's take a break. Let's find some community-based equitable research strategies, and we are going through the process of getting those strategies right now and incorporating them into our research plan. We have a funding plan we are adopting later this month for our transportation incentive programs, and we are reconfiguring those to prioritize equitable distribution of incentives to ensure that the vehicles that we're incentivizing are going into communities and into individuals who are lower income. Mm-hmm. And ensuring that community has the opportunity to work together, develop community-led solutions around all of our climate work. We're making a critical priority.
Fantastic. Yeah. Secretary Ross.
Yeah, no, the equity lens is something the governor has been so focused on, and so we all, and we can't succeed if we don't, because otherwise we're just going to keep repeating the same disproportionate burden on the same communities, and that's what we have to stop. There's so many inequities in society anyway. And so I think there's one thing that came out of COVID that I want to highlight here, and that is we learned how many languages. We learned about hardly reached communities that we had to reach, and we have made significant investment in community-based organizations, trusted messengers. Over the last 8 years in particular, we've built up a lot of capacity to give them voice. Inviting them to the table is one thing. To have them feel equal opportunity to weigh in and influence takes time and investment, and we're all committed to doing that. And our programs, it's hard with the Dairy Digester to prioritize disadvantaged farmers or historically underrepresented farmers because of our dairying model, but the communities themselves is where we focus at least 35% of our investment to make sure that that's going into those communities to make those communities better.
Fantastic. So I'd like to address one last issue, which is why you guys are here, because you're subnational governments. And I know Governor Newsom doesn't like to say subnational because it somehow, it sounds like it's less than national, right? But the guys negotiating down the hall here, they're the federal governments, and they're trying to figure out how to resolve climate change. Why is it important for subnational governments to be here? And what would be your message to governors or to mayors or to regional development heads in other countries? Because it's not only about the United States that we're talking about, but really it's the entire planet. Yeah. What does California have to offer and say to governments that also are subnationals in other parts? And I will say also, you are members, the first members of the CCAC, which is the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. It's a UN agency that is actually behind this methane pledge. You know, they're right up here somewhere, one of these right over there, and they're going to be implementing the methane pledge. And they depend on jurisdictions like California to help lead the way for a lot of their members.
So
we both want to talk about this.
So, when California adopted its first climate change law, AB 32, a provision in that law specifically said that we need to be reaching out to national and international partners so that we are all working together, because California's emissions, are less than 2% of the worldwide emissions, but the strategies that we can develop and work on can be exported and scaled up everywhere. And when we say all of government, we don't just mean all of California state government. We mean cities, we mean counties, we mean the state, we mean our federal partners, we mean our international partners. It really is an effort that all of us have to partake in.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that we have 40 million consumers gives us a special place to prove out things. I hate to say we're a living laboratory, but we are a living laboratory. Mm-hmm. The complexity, the diversity of our state, and the fact we have 40 million consumers gives us that opportunity to say, we did get the policy right, and the markets are following that, and I think we've proven that in multiple ways. I also just have to point out, I'm proud that we have proven you don't have to sacrifice environment for the economy because of the kind of economic growth that we have enjoyed. Yes, we've had the same bumps in the roads that others have, but we've continued to grow, and we're also showing the new way for a green economy to thrive and not sacrifice people and local economies in doing that.
Fantastic.
It's transition. You have to recognize that. But I just think we've really been able to do that. And we want to partner with others to share our learning experiences and what didn't work. But I'd say the Air Board hardly ever finds things that don't work. I just have to give kudos for kudos or two.
So one last thought for parting moment. The other day I had dinner with one of Greta's, Greta, the youth activist.
Greta. There's only one.
There's only one Greta. So I had dinner with one of her colleagues who actually declined the prize because Greta left, and they offered a prize. The UN offered a prize to Greta for leading the youth movement, and they didn't accept it because they're not happy with where the world is going. So I asked her colleague to summarize the COP for me in a sentence, and she said, just one word: urgency. 17-year-old. And she said to me, I've been working on this for a while. I'm like, when did you start? She started at age 11.
Wow.
And she lives in Virginia in the United States. So for you've been here now a few days, and you'll be here for a few more. Negotiators are trying to come up with a text to save the planet. We're here at the Methane Pavilion with the Methane Pledge. What does the COP mean for you? What are you getting out of the COP, and what do you take home, and what is your message, or what is your feeling about what is happening here? Maybe we can start with you, Chair Randolph.
So this is my first COP,
Okay.
and so I would say, along with urgency is optimism. I really feel that the energy in this room, the creativity, the fact that you were able to secure so many signatories to the Methane Pledge, really sent an incredibly strong message that we are all in and we need to address this. And so that's my takeaway from this experience.
Urgency and now optimism. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have to underscore that. It's my first one as well, and I'm here because of the emphasis on nature-based solutions, because we can't succeed without paying attention to that, and it's hugely complicated, but it gives a role for everyone. And so, of course, coming from farming and ranching, empowering farmers and ranchers to help solve some of these problems and empower them to do that. So I am optimistic, and I keep picking up on people talking about, but they feel that a lot of this discussion has been about implementation and action, and having the signatories on the deforestation, which I know has been done before, but it seems massive now. The methane thing, I was so excited about that, and you know my story about the ribbon cutting I did on Friday.
Yeah.
I just think that's huge. And then last night when I got back to my room and turned on the television, and there was John Kerry announcing a China-U.S. agreement, it's like, that is the kind of diplomacy that can change. I mean, I am naturally an optimist, but I'm glad this is my first one. I feel good about it.
Good.
I hope I don't get, I don't know, cynical.
No,
I don't ever get cynical.
So I'll
I
capture
cannot imagine you being cynical.
3 words, urgency, optimism, and implementation. I think that sums it up. I think there are 3 words to go with, but we all need to work hard now. You guys are a laboratory. You can get it right, you can get it wrong, but you need to continue to be a laboratory. We're looking at California, we're learning from you, and we hope to see more of you in the future. And that the next time we're here, we're already talking about what we've implemented to reduce methane and other short-lived pollutants as well as CO2. So thank you both for joining us.